Good morning and welcome to RTHK's Hong Kong Today. I'm Janice Wong.
And I'm Samantha Butler. Coming up, a local delegate to the National People's Congress says it might be in Carrie Lam's best interest not to run for a second term in office. Ukraine's president calls for Russia to be excluded from the UN Security Council. The World Bank says Asian economies' growth will slow in the next few months because of the Ukraine conflict. And in football, Manchester City and Liverpool win their Champions League quarter-final first legs.
A local delegate to the National People's Congress says it might be in Carrie Lam's best interest not to run for a second term in office, a day after the chief executive cited family reasons for her upcoming departure. As Jimmy Choi reports, Ip Kwok Him also said it was possible that the upcoming CE election may end up being a one-person race.
Speaking on an RTHK program, Ip Kwok Him, who's also an executive councillor, said he understands and respects Carrie Lam's decision not to seek re-election. He said he's long heard of her intention to step down after this current term, even though she subsequently hinted of a change of heart when the city's COVID-19 situation was relatively stable last year. But he said things took another turn when the fifth wave of infections broke out. When asked to comment on Mrs. Lam's performance, Mr. Ip said he admired the chief executive's efforts in upholding the rule of law here, but believed her working style could easily give off the impression that she ignored people's opinions, and that she was not doing enough to unify society.
As we have all seen, she is a very tough and strong government official. This is her style, and is something that can rub many people the wrong way. At the same time, on a professional level, she has quite a number of acquaintances, but not many friends in her personal life whom she can have a heart-to-heart with. So I believe there would be quite a few opposition voices if she decides to seek a second term.
On the upcoming race for the top job, the executive councillor said it's hard to estimate how many people would throw their hats into the ring, but the difficulty in securing enough nominations means it could well end up being a one-person contest. According to current rules, an election hopeful must receive at least 188 nominations from election committee members, with not less than 15 from each of the 5 sectors. The NPC deputy also stressed that the next CE must be authoritative, able to help unify the city and maintain the rule of law, have a strong sense of commitment, and be familiar with the government's operation.
Jimmy Choi. The chief executive election is now just over a month away, and all we know at the moment is that Carrie Lam won't put herself forward for a second term. Around half a dozen people have thrown their hats into the ring, although none of them are seen as serious contenders. So is it unusual that none of the ministers in the Lam administration have yet resigned, and no other major political figure has put themselves forward? Jimmy Choi asked a leading member of Beijing's top think tank on Hong Kong, Lau Siu Kai.
Well, it is unusual in the sense that in the past, we have opposition figure coming into the fray and run for the chief executive election. But this time, with the opposition gone, all the so-called patriots who want to run have to make sure that they have the trust of Beijing and that they can win material support from the election committee members. So all these candidates will take some time to test out whether they can get the support of Beijing or from the support of the election committee. And if Beijing does show its intention a long time before, no prospective candidate will come forward and declare his or her candidacy. And why it takes Beijing so long to make up its mind? Because Beijing is watching carefully the increasingly turbulent international situation in Hong Kong and the difficulty of Hong Kong in overcoming the COVID-19. And Beijing has to also to consult with a lot of people in Hong Kong as to who is the right person to become next executive. But they also in mind that given the fact that we have only our national election not too long ago, and the chief executive election has to follow the national election. So even if previously we don't have that kind of situation where the national election takes place so late, so that the time allowed for the chief executive election has become squeezed.
How likely do you think more than one candidate will get enough nominations?
Not quite likely.
So you think there might be a situation where only one candidate has got enough nominations?
I won't be surprised.
So in that case, there won't be any competition in this election?
Well, I think this is quite likely because, in the first place, I don't think there are 2 or 3 people with the same equal standing in the eyes of Beijing, in the eyes of the election committee members. At the same time, I don't think Beijing will want to have a contest which may allow foreign external forces to interfere in Hong Kong affairs or to create a situation of confusion within the patriotic camp or to sow division within the patriotic camp. So this time, I think Beijing might want to play safe and to have a successful election or proper confirmation election. But even if a single candidate comes into the fore, he or she still needs more than half of the votes from the election committee members.
Lau Siu-kai, a vice president of the Chinese Association of Hong Kong and Macau Studies, speaking there to Jimmy Choi. It's been a tumultuous term in office for Carrie Lam. Damon Pang has this look back at the past 5 years.
所得票數為777票。
Carrie Lam became Hong Kong's first female chief executive in 2017 when she defeated former finance chief John Tsang and retired Judge Wu Kwok-hing for the top job. During the campaign, Mr. Tsang described Mrs. Lam as Split 2.0, fearing that she would become a divisive leader. But Mrs. Lam disputed this. In her winning speech, she vowed to be humble as she started a new chapter with the people of Hong Kong.
In our journey together, my priority will be to heal the divide and to ease the frustrations and to unite our society to move forward.
Mrs. Lam enjoyed relatively high popularity in her early years in charge. At the opening ceremony of the bridge to Zhuhai and Macau in late 2018, she walked side by side with President Xi Jinping. She introduced her Lantau Tomorrow vision for mass reclamation in waters east of Lantau and also oversaw the opening of the express rail station in West Kowloon. But Mrs. Lam's popularity took a nosedive in 2019. Following the confession of a Hong Kong student that he had murdered his girlfriend during a trip to Taipei, she tried to push through a bill to allow for his extradition to the island. But instead, she drew widespread opposition and massive protests that at times were violent. When organizers said 1 million people took to the streets to oppose the extradition bill in June 2019, the government vowed to press ahead with the legislative process. The LegCo building was then surrounded. Days later, Mrs. Lam announced the bill's suspension, which didn't satisfy protesters. A month later, she said this.
呢條條例嘅草案已經壽終正寢. The bill is dead.
But the protests continued, and in September that year, Mrs. Lam officially withdrew the legislation. In June 2020, Beijing introduced national security legislation for the SAR, with Carrie Lam proclaiming it had ended what she called the Black Riots and brought back order and stability to Hong Kong. She rejected allegations from foreign governments that the security law undermined people's freedom or the SAR's rule of law.
The legal system is as robust as ever under the national security law, that judicial independence is not undermined in any way, that Hong Kong now restores law and order, which makes Hong Kong an even more attractive place for doing business.
Before the passage of the NSL, COVID-19 had already hit Hong Kong. Since then, social distancing measures, mask and vaccine mandates, the closure of schools, restaurants and other businesses have all taken a toll on the local economy. Hong Kong was initially able to sustain one of the lowest death rates in the world, but the SAR has seen thousands of deaths in the latest Omicron-driven outbreak. And as the economy went south, so did the popularity of Hong Kong's leader. That wasn't helped by Mrs. Lam's sometimes conflicting messages, which extended to her wearing of face masks. Here she is in January, just after Omicron surfaced in Hong Kong, explaining to reporters why she hadn't put a mask on to meet them.
I'm very somber. I'm very solemn because I'm very worried. And wearing the mask will not allow people to see for themselves I'm the chief executive of the Hong Kong SAR. People need to understand and feel my feeling.
Known for her hard-working, no-nonsense style, Carrie Lam is wrapping up 42 years in government, during which she also served as Secretary for Development and as Chief Secretary in C.Y. Leung's administration.
Damon Pang with that report. The President of the Legislative Council, Andrew Leung, says the electoral reform has brought rationality back to the legislature, which allowed it to pass a record 46 government bills in the past year. As Frank Yung reports, the council also passed $327 billion in government funding.
The sixth LegCo term, originally slated to end in September 2020, was extended for a year after the government decided to push back the election over COVID-19 concerns. During that period, the council saw mass resignations and disqualifications of non-establishment members. Writing in his annual LegCo report, Andrew Leung said the relationship between the executive and the legislature has warmed up in the past year, prompting the resumption of the chief executive's question time, something that was suspended in June 2019. He said he hopes executive authorities and lawmakers will continue to work together to safeguard the city's constitutional order and ensure the long-term stability of Hong Kong, without disruptions from who he said were lawmakers with grossly disorderly conduct. Mr. Leung noted that the 49 council meetings that have since been held were able to effectively clear a backlog of government bills. The LegCo chief also said the Finance Committee held 48 meetings, lasting about 127 hours, significantly less time than the year before. Despite that, he said the committee passed 120 financial proposals in a year, a record high for the sixth legislative term, involving more than $327 billion. To accommodate an additional 20 lawmakers' offices in the current term, Mr. Leung said construction on expanding the LegCo complex would commence later in the year, with the hope of completing it by mid-2025.
Frank Yung reporting. Hong Kong logged 3,254 new COVID-19 infections yesterday, 116 more than the day before. As Jimmy Choi reports, officials said people must not let their guard down, saying there are still many silent transmission chains in the community.
Of the new COVID infections, 1,658 cases were identified by PCR tests, while 1,596 people took self-tests. Authorities also reported 87 more deaths linked to COVID, including 81 people who died at public hospitals in the past 24 hours, and 6 who had passed away earlier. In total, 8,136 people have died in the fifth wave, putting the death rate at 0.7%. More than 1.16 million people were infected. Dr. Albert Au from the Centre for Health Protection urged people to stay vigilant and avoid social gatherings during the upcoming Easter holidays, saying infection figures are still relatively high.
In the past 2-3 weeks, we did see the epidemic continuing on a downward trend, but the current infection level means there are still a lot of transmission chains in the community, and members of the public must not misinterpret that as an easing of the outbreak or that it's come under control. On the contrary, they must stay vigilant and observe all social distancing measures during this critical time.
He also acknowledged that many people had been under a lot of stress during the pandemic, especially those whose family members had contracted COVID or had passed away. Dr. Au said people can receive emotional support from government clinical psychologists via a hotline set up by the Centre for Health Protection. Meanwhile, authorities also reported 16 imported coronavirus infections involving people who flew in from places like the UK, Thailand, Turkey, the Netherlands, Qatar, Canada, Australia, Singapore, Spain and France. The government said it will ban Qatar Airways from operating flights from Doha to Hong Kong, as well as Cathay Pacific from flying from Manchester to Hong Kong for a week, after 3 or more passengers on those flights tested positive for COVID.